We all know artificial intelligence is moving at lightning speed. But what about the laws that are supposed to govern it? Well, they're struggling to keep up. Today, we're diving into the race to build a real legal framework for how the US government uses AI, and how we're moving from a kind of Wild West of private deals to, hopefully, a new era of public accountability. So that really brings us to the central question here. For years, the answer has been a lot more complicated than you'd probably expect. Are the rules for AI being set by our elected officials, through a public, democratic process? Or are they being shaped behind closed doors by tech giants negotiating with government agencies? This question really gets to the heart of a massive challenge. And there's actually a name for this challenge: the regulatory chasm. It's this growing gap between how fast AI tech is evolving and how slow our legal system is to create clear, enforceable rules for it. And listen, this isn't just some abstract idea. It has very real consequences for our privacy and our civil rights. So what happens when you have this massive chasm? Well, you get a system that some people are calling privacy by private contract. Before any formal laws are on the books, the rules of the game are basically set in these one-off, agency-by-agency deals. And this slide, it just lays it out so clearly. It really contrasts the ideal with the reality. On one side, you've got laws from Congress. They're debated in public, they create standard rights for everyone through a democratic process. But on the other side, you have rules by contract. These are negotiated in private, which means protections can be completely different from one agency to the next, and corporate influence can play a huge role. And look, this isn't just someone's opinion. This is what's actually happening. This quote nails it. Fundamental parts of our privacy aren't protected by a single solid law. Instead, they're basically just line items in a government procurement contract. Think about that. Okay, so this whole system of private contracts and missing laws, it ends up creating what experts are calling regulatory blind spots. These are areas where really powerful AI tools are being used with little to no federal oversight, and that poses serious risks to some of the most vulnerable communities. Let's dig into a couple of really important examples. So let me ask a question. How many times has the Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD, officially tracked the use of facial recognition technology by the public housing agencies it funds? The answer is zero. Not once. It's a complete black hole of data, which means we have absolutely no idea how widespread this tech is in federally funded housing. And of course, when you don't track the technology, you can't see the harm it might be causing. We're talking about residents potentially facing discriminatory evictions because of a flawed algorithm. This lack of oversight creates what some have called low-rights environments, basically places where new surveillance tech is tested on marginalized groups before it gets rolled out to everybody else. So what's the fix for this? Well, to close this exact blind spot, Congress has proposed something called the No Biometric Barriers to Housing Act. The goal is pretty simple and direct. Just ban the use of technologies like facial recognition in most federally funded housing. It would create a clear legal protection, where right now there's basically nothing. Now let's jump to another huge blind spot: the criminal justice system. Right now, and this is wild, there is no federal law that requires prosecutors to tell a defendant that facial recognition was used to identify them. An algorithm's error rates can stay hidden, creating this trust but don't verify system where someone's freedom could literally be on the line. Okay, so after all that, how do we actually fix this mess? The federal government is finally starting to build a more solid framework. And a huge piece of this is totally rethinking how we test AI to make sure it's actually safe and fair before it starts impacting people's lives. This slide really gets to the core of the shift in thinking. For the longest time, AI was tested in these perfect, sterile lab environments with crystal clear data. But in the real world, it's dealing with unpredictable lighting, grainy CCTV footage, you name it. The new approach is moving away from these voluntary lab standards and is now mandating operational testing out in the messy, real-world conditions where the tech is actually used. So this whole process is becoming way more official. We're going from those old voluntary lab tests to mandated, real-world, operational tests. And then there's step 3, which is absolutely crucial: developing national standards for the human in the loop. That's the actual person who has to check the AI's work, making sure a human being, not just an algorithm, is making the final call. And it's not just about new testing protocols. We're also seeing some pretty serious legislative moves. The Facial Recognition Act of 2023 is a really big one. It's trying to set a clear legal standard by requiring law enforcement to get a warrant before using this tech for surveillance, just like they'd have to for a physical search of your home.
But look, laws and protocols are only as good as the people who are actually putting them into practice, right? And that brings us to this brand new, super critical role in the federal government, the Chief AI Officer, or CAIO. You can think of them as the human bridge that has to navigate this incredibly complex new landscape.
I mean, the CIO's job description is just massive. They have to implement new executive orders, lead oversight boards, and, this part is so important, they have to actively engage with the communities who are most affected by this technology. They're also on the hook for transparency, like keeping a public list of how their agency is using AI. And this slide, it really captures the incredible tightrope that a CIO has to walk every single day. On one hand, they have to push their agency's mission forward. We're talking national security, being fast and effective. But on the other hand, they have this fundamental duty to protect civil rights through accountability and fairness. It is a really, really tough balancing act. So here's where it gets really interesting and, honestly, pretty controversial. The new rules give these CIOs a very powerful tool. They have the authority to waive minimum risk management practices for what they deem mission-critical operations. This creates a huge potential loophole. For example, in a national security crisis, could a CII just waive the rules designed to prevent algorithmic bias? This is the kind of exception that civil rights advocates are watching like a hawk. Which brings us all the way back to our final big-picture question. Right now, we are building the plane while we are flying it. The creation of CAIOs, new testing standards, proposed laws, these are all massive steps toward closing that regulatory chasm. But as technology just keeps accelerating, the ultimate challenge is still there. Can our democratic and legal processes ever truly keep pace?